Every empire promises that its revenues are safe. Every government insists its promises will last forever. And history, without exception, has always proven them wrong. From Rome to France, from the Confederacy to modern Lebanon, people have always woken up to the same reality. Their savings turned to dust, their salaries reduced to pocket change, and the things they trusted most, the ones they said would never collapse, had flown away, carrying their futures and dreams with them. So, you see, collapse cannot be brushed off as mere bad luck. It is the rule of the game. The real question is this: financial systems will collapse one day. So how are you going to protect yourself when that day comes? The biggest mistake is thinking that the systems we have will last forever. We look at our bank accounts and the money in our pockets and think we have our backs against a solid rock. But money is not a rock. It is nothing but trust. And that trust can vanish overnight. This is why history is both so brutal and an unparalleled teacher. Every collapse leaves behind clear clues about what actually protects wealth and what turns to dust and blows away. If you look closely, you will realize that the survivors of these disasters were not those who trusted the system the most, but those who doubted it first. 1. Byzantium's art of debasement. Take the Byzantine Empire, the one that, after Western Rome fell, somehow kept its ships sailing for another 1,000 years. The flagship of this economy was a gold coin called the solidus. European, Middle Eastern, and Asian merchants accepted this coin blindly. For centuries, it was literally the global reserve currency, the dollar of its era. Now you might say, come on, they were a huge empire. Didn't they learn a lesson from how Rome turned its silver denarius into worthless junk? How emperors kept shaving the silver content until the coin was basically tin? No, they didn't learn. Centuries later, the Byzantines made the same mistake, this time with gold. They began lowering the purity of the gold, stealing from its weight, and mixing in cheap metals to cheat the system. At first, nobody noticed this situation. But then, that trust wavered, and eventually, it cracked and shattered completely. The coin that had been the flagship of Mediterranean trade suddenly turned into an ordinary piece of metal, a political lie. Debasing the currency destroyed trust, and once trust was gone, the Byzantine economy had to say goodbye to its old glorious days. So who survived? Of course, those who didn't trust paper promises or the emperor's word. The merchants who quietly accumulated real gold or land where the state's hand couldn't reach preserved their wealth. Everyone else just watched their money turn into dust. Our first lesson to keep in mind: governments can never give up the sickness of lowering the value of money by printing it, meaning creating inflation. And when they do this, real wealth flees to assets that states cannot counterfeit or print. 2. History's Black Death and the reality that cash is everything. Of course, not every kriz stems from governments tinkering with money. Sometimes a shock comes out of nowhere and turns everything upside down. In the mid-14th century, Europe was shaken by its biggest nightmare, the Black Death, the plague. Within a few years, nearly half of Europe's population died. Cities turned into ghost towns, and villages were wiped off the map. But the economic side of the story was mind-blowing. What do you think happened when half of the labor force disappeared? Labor suddenly became as valuable as diamonds. The surviving workers and peasants started demanding crazy wages. Food and land, which used to be very expensive, became abundant because there was no one left. Families with cash, liquidity, silver, or those who were simply able to work gained a bargaining power they had never seen in their lives. Land and houses that once couldn't be approached were sold for pennies. Because everywhere was abandoned, the market was completely in the buyer's hands. Does this situation sound familiar from somewhere? It should. We watched the modern version of this during the COVID pandemic. Supply chains broke, and governments printed trillions of dollars and euros so the system wouldn't stop. The result? Those with ready cash collected assets from the bottom, while those scraping by on a salary fell further behind. Housing prices soared, stock markets broke records. Millions of ordinary people, on the other hand, tore their hair out wondering how to scrape rent together. The rhythm of history never changes. Pandemics redistribute wealth. It has always been that way. Survivors of the plague turned this crisis into an opportunity to climb the social ladder. Those with cash during COVID also cheaply scooped up the houses, shares, and companies that others couldn't hold on to. The lesson is a bit bitter, but it is real. Crises reward those who have reserves and cash behind them. They punish those caught unprepared. 3. Florentine banks, and these ships won't sink lie. Pandemics can change the color of the game all at once. But the banking crisis in Renaissance-era Florence also teaches us something very critical. Those giant institutions that look too big to fail are actually like a house of cards. If one gets shaken, they all collapse. In the 1340s, Florence was the financial heart of Europe. There were incredibly powerful banking families like the Bardi and the Peruzzi. These men lent money to actual kings. They made their biggest mistake by handing over massive amounts of money to King Edward III of England, who was fighting France. When King Edward stood up one day and said, "I'm not paying my debt," the banks collapsed one after another. People's deposits burned, trade stopped, and wealthy Florence suddenly fell into the middle of chaos. The ordinary citizen who trusted the city's fancy giant banks learned the bitter truth. The fact that an institution is huge or highly famous does not mean your money is safe. That whole too big to fail cliché we use today is a lie as old as financial history itself. Banks are not established to guarantee your future. They are built to make a profit. And when they crash, they won't hesitate to take your savings down with them. The exact same thing happened when Lehman Brothers went under in 2008 and when banks locked their doors in Lebanon in 2019. If you want to survive, you must not forget that an institution's promises are only valid until the doors close. 4. The American Civil War and bags of paper carried around. When the American Civil War is mentioned, we all think of battle scenes and political speeches. But in the background, a brutal currency war was taking place that most people today have never even heard of. Both the North and the South saw that the cost of this war was impossible to meet, so they started running the printing press day and night. The North printed greenbacks, paper money with no gold backing, relying entirely on the government's word. At first, it looked like a very cool, patriotic move, but the more green paper they flooded into the market, the more the purchasing power of the money dropped. Inflation ate the money up. On the Southern Confederation side, the situation turned into a complete comedy and tragedy. Finding no resources, the South printed mountains of graybacks. Towards the end of the war, inflation was expressed in thousands of percent. Soldiers' salaries became worthless before they even hit their pockets. People had started carrying bags of money just to buy a loaf of bread. By 1865, Confederate currency had become literal garbage. So, whose word held weight in that environment? Naturally, the one who owned tangible wealth. While money turned into a joke, real things like land, food, and gold preserved their value. Ordinary people were devastated watching their lifetime savings turn to dust, while slick individuals with tangible goods collected people's properties at fire sale prices. This is a detail that today's Americans don't talk about much, but one they should keep in mind. Their own country has already lived through a currency collapse. And on that day, what saved people was not the paper in their wallets, but the real assets that the system could not destroy with inflation. 5. The French Revolution and worthless, patriotic paper. France is also the most vivid example of how revolutions can destroy money much faster than any war. In the 1790s, when revolutionaries brought down the king and seized church lands, they issued a new paper currency called the assignat, which was supposedly backed by these properties. Supposedly, the economy was going to run smoothly. But the government broke the settings of the printing press. They printed and printed. Each newly printed note turned the value of the previous one into pocket change. Prices soared, salaries stayed flat, and the money you called an assignat became no different from toilet paper before long. Farmers refused to sell food in exchange for these makeshift pieces of paper. They said, "Either give us goods or give us silver." Bread riots started again in Paris, and the revolution began to devour its own children. Do you know who came out on top in this crisis? Of course, not those holding that patriotic paper. It was those who owned things the state could not print, namely food, gold, or property. By the time the ordinary public learned their lesson, it was already way too late. Promises, no matter how noble the intention behind them, are only worth as much as the other party accepts. The moment trust ends, your savings don't just shrink, they disappear instantly. 6. The 1997 Asian crisis. Debt is a trap, not an engine. Let's bring time a little closer and go to Asia. In 1997, a speculative attack on the Thai baht suddenly turned into a fire that burned the entire region. Thailand had borrowed dollars aggressively, trusting that its currency's peg to the dollar would hold. When the system blew up, these debts denominated in foreign currency doubled and tripled overnight. Paying them back became nearly impossible. Investors fled without looking back. From Indonesia to Malaysia and South Korea, all the dominoes fell. Unemployment skyrocketed, and massive states begged at the IMF's door. So, who suffered the most? Was it the global hedge funds that triggered this crisis? Of course not. Once again, it was the ordinary citizen whose savings shrank, whose home loan installments multiplied, and who lost their job. But the scenario was the same. Those who had dollars in their pockets or moved their money abroad survived the crisis much more comfortably than those who stayed loyal to the local currency. While countries borrowing and someone else's money groaned under austerity policies, the giants of Wall Street came and scooped up Asia's most beautiful assets for next to nothing. It looked like a local crisis, but it was a textbook global wealth transfer. The lesson is clear. Borrowing in someone else's currency is a death trap. When the storm breaks, nothing happens to the creditor. Whatever happens always happens to the debtor. 7. Modern day. Closed doors in Lebanon and our illusions. Don't say, oh, these are all old stories or distant countries, because this movie is currently in theaters right now. In Lebanon, between 2019 and 2021, banks did something that people like us living in the modern world would say, no way, that can't be, it would never happen. They locked the doors of the banks. People woke up one morning to find accounts frozen, ATM withdrawals restricted, and the currency plunging down an abyss. The Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value. Lifetime savings turned into the price of a piece of chewing gum in a single day. People cried and begged in front of banks to get their own money, but the answer they got was, there is no money. Moreover, this didn't just happen to small shopkeepers, doctors, engineers, retirees, the middle class. Whoever trusted the system was wiped out. Bitter but true, the money in your bank is not your treasure chest. You have simply given a loan to an institution that has the right to say, I am not giving you your money back in a moment of crisis. That's all. Who broke free there? Those who had already moved their money abroad, bought gold or property, or kept their cash outside the bank. The rest stayed caught in the trap. Look, these stories are not far from us at all. In 2008, while people's homes were being seized in America, the banks that caused the crisis were bailed out with state money. The trillions printed during the 2020 pandemic sent the shares and houses of the rich soaring, while the ordinary worker's salary melted against inflation. Just in 2023, massive regional banks in America went under overnight, meaning that too big to fail story is nothing but a lullaby you tell yourself to feel better until the bank doors close in your face. What will we do now? The grand paradox of crisis. As you can see, history doesn't give us a single magic formula. It teaches us to position ourselves according to the situation. If you are in Byzantium, you hold gold. If you just came out of the plague, you have cash to collect dirt-cheap land. If you are in Florence, you don't buy into the big bank talk. If you are in the American Civil War, you hold tangible goods. If you are in the French Revolution, you hold food and property. If you are in Asia, you don't borrow in dollars. If you are in Lebanon, you get out before the bank doors close. Events change, but the main idea is always the same. If you want to survive, you stop blindly believing in pieces of paper or institutions, and you see what truly holds value when the illusion ends. And here is the most striking part of the matter. Collapses are a tragedy for some, while they are the opportunity of a lifetime for others. If you are unprepared, you are ruined. But if you have your cash and your real assets that cannot be printed or counterfeited, it is time to collect the values that people are discarding for next to nothing. The fact that peasants became landlords after the plague, and that those with cash scooped up foreclosed houses for pennies after the 2008 crisis, is all because of this. So the point is not just to play defense. It is being able to position yourself wisely in the moment of crisis and take your share from that wealth transfer. Your greatest guarantee, the power of your own skills. But the matter doesn't just end with property and real estate. The greatest wealth is what you can produce in hard times. Those who stood tall even when everything was turned upside down in history were those who could do the jobs that nobody else could. The baker who could still turn out bread in that chaotic environment. The master craftsman who could repair broken tools. The farmer who could till the soil and feed people. The merchant who could safely deliver goods from one place to another. These people didn't just survive crises. They grew inside those crises. Because money can lose its value, but production never loses its value. People aren't just going to starve. In the end, they will eat, wear clothes, shelter, and trade. The back of the man who can meet these needs will never hit the ground. This is the ultimate permanent protection, not waiting for states or banks to come and save you. It is putting real assets, real skills, and the fact that the systems we trust so much are actually hanging by a thread into your pocket. Remember, every kriz is a massive wealth transfer. It is a flow from the crowds who blindly trust the system to that minority that figures things out beforehand and prepares. A shift from paper promises to tangible values. From those who want things handed to them on a silver platter to those who produce value. History has shown us this over and over again. So at the end of the day, the question is not, will everything be ruined one day? Because history is already full of examples of this. The real question is, when that day comes, will you be among that crowd left holding empty papers, or among that smart minority holding real values? History may not repeat itself exactly, but if you turn a deaf ear to it, it will not hesitate to crush you just like everyone else. If what I've told you here contributed even a little to you learning the truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The answers are hidden in history. I'm just showing you where to look. See you in the next video.